Hey everybody, Eric Rennie here, and welcome to the Writ Podcast. It's the last week of sitting in the House of Commons before MPs break for the summer. So how have the last few months gone for each of the parties, and what should they be doing on the barbecue circuit over the next few months? So the Pollster Panel is back. Dan Arnold is Chief Strategy Officer at Pollara and was the Liberals pollster for Justin Trudeau in 3 federal election campaigns. Andrew Enns is Executive Vice President at Leger and conducted polling for Stephen Harper's Conservatives. And James Valkey is Director of Research and Strategy at Viewpoints Research and has worked on many central NDP campaigns. Hey guys, welcome back.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
So, House is lifting presumably in a few days. I know that the kids are going to be excited to run out of the front steps of the House, like the kids will be doing outside of their schools all across the country.
Although I feel like Mark Carney is going to make them work right until that last bell rings on the last day. This is not going to be an easy teacher. It's not going to be a June where you show up half the time and mail it in. It's right to the wire, I think.
Yeah. He's going to be a bit more of a hard marker, I think. So why don't we start with the Liberals? So I look back at it. The last time we chatted was actually in February. And in February, that was when the Liberals really started to move ahead in the polls. Up to then, it was still pretty close between the Liberals and the Conservatives. There hadn't been that much change since the last election. But we've seen now months of polling where the gap between the Liberals and the Conservatives can be somewhere around double digits or bigger. We've seen high approval ratings for Mark Carney and the Liberals. So, Dan, why don't we start with you? What's worked for them over the last few months?
Yeah, it seems like they're still in a very good position. I saw Andrew had them at 50% in a poll recently. As far as I hear, there's still a queue outside the whip's office to triage floor crossers who want to join the party. So they're in a good spot, which is not usually the case for a party that's been in power for 11 years. In terms of what's worked for them, I think it's that they don't feel like a party that's been in power for 11 years. Pollara put out a poll on the 1-year anniversary of Carney's time as Prime Minister. And one of the questions we asked in that was, does this feel like a new government to you or like the 4th term of a Liberal government? And more people said it feels like a new government than the 4th term of a Liberal government. Among people who voted Liberal in the last election campaign, it was 56 new government, 26 old government. So, I think they've been able to paint themselves as a new government, which is especially important for Carney because the knock on him the last campaign was, you're just like Justin. You're not real change. And, all prime ministers like to show change, but I think it was especially important for him to show change because that was a bit of the critique against him. And on that same poll, 3 and 4 people who voted Liberal feel they've gotten change. Among people who didn't vote Liberal but are now leaning that way today, 86% feel like they've gotten change. So I think, if anything, there's some people out there who maybe weren't sure about Carney last election campaign. I don't know if it's the same old. He looks different. He seems different. I think even some of them have come to the Liberals, and that's why they're in better shape today than they were in the last election campaign, if you want to sum it up in one kind of thematic.
Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think he's run a good a good government in terms of some of the change. I think the key thing, though, for me is he's managed, certainly compared to his predecessor, just stay out of the nonsense. I mean, he has kept things. Now, the situation around him is different. I mean, certainly some issues that require much more discipline in terms of from a government perspective. But he's just stayed away from picking the fights, the sort of which I would just say some of the tangents that his predecessor got off on in terms of, getting into some difficulties. Mr. Carney has made a real strong effort to bridge the gaps with premiers, regardless of political stripe. I think that is serving him well in terms of the country. He's very calm. He hasn't sort of reacted in a way that puts himself, maybe momentarily people would go, oh, that's great, tell that Donald Trump to go shove it, when the reality is then you'll be backtracking on that at some point in time and then leave people with a sour taste in their mouth. I think he's very measured. I think he's been pretty consistent, and I think Canadians are fine with that right now. I think that's they're still very much, I would suggest, a real omnipresent Trump U.S. factor that is a real backdrop to a lot of what drives opinion and how people are feeling. You still look at that generational, there's still a real pronounced generational divide where that 55 plus are still strongly backing the Liberals. And I think right now it's working quite well. Not to say, and maybe we'll get into this later, but not to say that there isn't going, some rougher waters potentially ahead. But he's managing government very well, and I think that's probably for me the key thing that's keeping him where he's at in public opinion.
James, what do you think on this?
Yeah, the sentiment I think that I'm hearing is, and if we look at the trajectory of Mark Carney over the last year and a half, he should name Donald Trump the honorary leader of the official opposition, because that's really who he's fighting against. When he came into power, he won on the back of Donald Trump's tariffs. Over the course of the last 12 months, he has measured the CUSMA or NAFTA agreement negotiations in contrast and at a very measured pace compared to the chaos south of the border. And in contrast, he's looked like a leader that is taking Canada in the right direction. And I think that we're seeing that in public sentiment, to the point where he only won a minority government, but has secured his majority through floor crossers. He has won by-elections, which secured it. But it's unusual for a sitting prime minister to secure a majority within the first year of their mandate where they received a minority, and to do that by and large through floor crossing. I think that the numbers that Dan had mentioned, and you were referencing, Eric, about his pinnacle or apex in February, March, were on the heels of Davos, where he was very well received across the board in all of our qual and quant. And he has kind of ridden this wave. The wind has been in his sails and at his back since day one, and as a result, he has been doing quite well.
Well, let's take it back in the other direction. You mentioned, that things seem to be going very well right now for Mark Carney, but we've seen in some polling, now we haven't seen it in every poll, but we have seen in some polling that the Liberals' numbers might be coming down a little bit, or Mark Carney's own personal numbers. Even the Leger poll, which had the Liberals at 50%, had Mark Carney's approval rating actually dropping. So, James, do you think that we're seeing some signs of some vulnerability, or is he still pretty Teflon right now?
If Davos was the pinnacle of his prime ministership to date, the last month or so have been the low end. He has lost a very prominent Liberal MP due to agreements signed with Alberta, specifically over the environment, and that has resonated quite deeply in certain regions of the country. In Quebec, people talked about it quite substantively. I think that has been problematic for him. I think that his speech to the New York Economic Club, where he said a strong Canada will make America great again, is in contrast to the messaging that he delivered in his Davos speech, in so much that he tied the success of Canada directly to the success of America, whereas Davos, it seemed like there was a real push to find distance between those two diverging countries. I also think that he's made some mistakes on the AI front, like strategic mistakes. From what we're hearing on this, we've done measuring. We actually have tracking with a few of our clients. From 2023, we started tracking AI, and people have only gotten more concerned and more aware. The upsides are slim to little, and the downsides are growing by the day. And yet the Liberals are driving forward. Avi Lewis called the minister for AI and the minister for AI marketing and advertising. Like they're going down a singular path. that I think is problematic because the headwinds against AI are growing strong. Wob Canoe is out there saying they're already going to say no to energy development for this purpose, and I think we're only going to see more. And as it stands right now, the federal Liberals are on one side of the equation, and they are strongly pro-AI, and it's not resonating out there in the public.
Andrew, what do you think? Is that a vulnerability for them? Are there signs of some fatigue?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I look at, as you say, Erica, we had the Prime Minister's approvals dropping a bit, but I mean, he's still 50% plus. I think he's still in pretty strong shape. I think the vulnerabilities and probably some hits in terms of popularity are going to happen because he has to do things. To Dan's point, I mean, certainly this is a new government in terms of tone and kind of announced policy. It's yet to really be a new government in terms of demonstrated policy change and really initiatives. And I think that's where Mr. Carney's governing as a progressive conservative, to call it that, to tack more to that center and even a bit more to that center right. It's going to put pressure on the party, on the Liberal Party. It's going to put pressure on Canadians who are going to James's point on the Guilbeault's departure. I mean, certainly there are elements within the Liberal Party that are concerned about that. We saw that in the Liberal caucus, but the country's economy is, we're debating whether it's recession or not in terms of think tanks. Arguably, it's not great. We probably agree at that. And to me, that's why you've got this generational divide in terms of support for, largely fixated on the whole Trump and the U.S. And you've got that older generation that's the focus. But under 55, focus is still affordability, is economy, is the job future. James is right. AI is not tracking, concerns tracking ahead of support on with respect to AI, and some of that's tied to that young adult cohort that's going, like, where am I fitting in all this, and what's the government doing? And I think I give the government of Canada credit. I give Mr. Carney credit. Like, he's got policy on that, but the action associated with some of that is going to ruffle feathers. Like, Wob Canoe, sure, we only want small data centers in Manitoba. Guess what? The rest of the world just hears we don't want data centers. I don't want to be, quite frankly, a province that says no to every data center, because that looks like the future. And unless someone presents something really compelling, and I think Mr. Carney said the same thing, we're going to have our own in Canada. Where he puts them, how he gets it done is going to ruffle feathers. And that's where you're going to see, some harder times, I think, for the government. But he's got lots of political capital after a year, so that's what it's there for.
Dan, what do you think on this?
I mean, I kind of feel like we're sitting around complaining that the Hurricanes lost 2 games in the Stanley Cup final, which was their worst round of the playoffs, and Frederik Andersen had a bad series, and there's a lot of things they need to fix. And the end result is the Liberals are still very popular in the polls, right? And I don't disagree with anything that the other said. I agree. I think AI, all the polling would show that people are more apprehensive than excited about the potential there. The government maybe needs to recalibrate there to some extent. Young people still aren't in love with this government. Ultimately, it will catch up with them at some point. And I mean, the polling we did again on Carney's first year in power, on pretty much every issue, people say things have gotten worse than better over the past year. They think that the Carney approach is better than the approach of the past government, but the majority of Canadians, especially in cost of living, feel like things have gotten worse. And eventually that catches up with you with almost any government. Maybe not the Wob Canoe government, but all new governments eventually, it hits you at a point where people start to judge you based on results as opposed to tone, intention, effort, approach. And for now, Carney's still being judged on the latter of that. But at some point, people will look around and say, like, my life's not great, and what's the government done to make my life better? That might be in 1 year, it might be in 7 years, 8 years, who knows?
Before we move on from the Liberals, Dan, so Léger had, as we mentioned, that 50%, and the last time we had seen the Liberals at over 50% was in sort of the first kind of aftermath of Justin Trudeau's victory in 2015. So Dan, you were polling at that time, kind of looking at what, how things were going for Justin Trudeau during that honeymoon phase. What's different between that kind of post-election honeymoon for Justin Trudeau in 2016, 2017, and what we're seeing right now for Mark Carney, if there is any difference?
Honestly, I don't think there's a difference. Like, I think it's the same thing. Like, people want to change from Harper. They want to change from Trudeau. Trudeau has changed from Harper. Carney has changed from Trudeau. People are in the moment. They're excited about the new approach of the government. And that's why I say at some point, it'll come over a cliff. And I experienced that over time. It came over a cliff for Trudeau. And I guess the question is Carney going to be able to have done enough that at that point he can point to like some tangible things that he's done when he goes to re-election? Even if the love affair is over, he can at least say, look, I've done these things, or I've moved us in this direction. The one thing I guess that maybe Carney has that Trudeau didn't is the constant reminder in the form of Trump. Carney was elected, as was mentioned, to deal with Trump. So if Trump is still there as the reminder of why people elected Carney, that probably helps keep that in people's heads of, oh yeah, this is why I like the guy. This is why I voted for him in the first place. But Donald Trump won't be there forever either. So eventually he's going to have to be judged on his record.
But I would say, I mean, the thing, Dan, is you're right. Justin Trudeau was elected to change from Stephen Harper. There was a definite feeling that we were just kind of dour, and we needed a breath of fresh air and let the sunshine in. And it was a blank canvas for Prime Minister Trudeau, which actually, when you look back in hindsight, was probably would have used some lines on that canvas to stay within, because it just got too much, and there were a lot of promises, and they didn't get done. They got distracted. I think for Mr. Carney, he didn't get elected on a big mandate to change. He got elected on a mandate to protect us from Donald Trump and American aggression. And the guy running on change was Pierre Poilievre. Came close, but he didn't get it. And so I do think that now, sure, you ask people, it's a new government, that's good. But there's still mission number one for Mr. Carney is the American situation. And there's going to be a bit of a focus on that, I think, sometime over the summer with trade negotiations and where that, where those things go. But I do think it's a little different for Mr. Carney. I think potentially good and potentially maybe a little bit dangerous. But, as you say, we'll see where that goes.
And I'll just add, I think the halcyon days of the Conservatives when, quote unquote, Canada was broken, the metrics underscoring that message about housing, about income, about inflation. Inflation's down, certainly, but it's not negative. The conditions that supported Poilievre to talk about Canada being broken are still under the surface. So that could rear its ugly head anytime.
Okay. Dan, I can hear you have your cat is meowing. Very cat-friendly podcast, as anybody knows who's followed this. So I'm sure your cat has some opinions on this. But so you mentioned we've mentioned Pierre Poilievre. So let's move to the Conservatives. Talk about how things were going well for the Liberals in the spring. Andrew, if things are going well for the Liberals in the spring, what wasn't working for the Conservatives?
Yeah, I think they're obviously the floor crossing served as a real significant distraction. I think for the Conservatives, they're still struggling a little bit. I think to James's point, the substance of what they're saying still has merit. There's still challenges in the housing. Affordability is still significant. There's still lots of things that this government has announced but hasn't done. I do find from my perspective that the tone of the message coming from the Conservatives is not resonating, is not hitting well with the Canadian public. I still think that a large percentage of that Canadian public, again, with the omnipresent American aggression, Trump, the Trump factor, I think that they're looking still for a bit more of constructive criticism, let's say, a bit more of a supportive where, the petty, some of the petty politics doesn't land well. given some of what from the public perspective, what they see as the severity of some of the threats, in Canada. So I think that's where, the message has probably been landing flat. I think for the Conservatives, they need to, we set the tone of the call here today in terms of what do they need to do over the summer. I think they need to, work, get back to some of the basics. I don't think they need to fixate on the Liberal number, whether it's 48 or 50%, because there's a lot of NDP support in that number that's probably not going to, get affected by what Pierre Poilievre does. But they need to get their numbers up closer to sort of the high 30s, low, maybe 40%. That's probably what they've lost. When I look back at where sort of they were, before their sort of peak, I think that's a reasonable number for them to, and they need to sort of think about the tone and the message and talk to people at the barbecue, because I think you'll hear from people like that saying, what's the country going to do? Not necessarily what are Conservatives, what's the country going to do? And we haven't talked about the separation stuff going on, but I think that's on the minds of a lot of people, is that, enough about sort of the partisan side of things, but what are we doing as a country? And I think that's maybe where he can think about in terms of message.
Yeah, we'll try to chat a bit about the Alberta referendum if we get some time. James, what do you think? What hasn't been working so well for the Conservatives for the last little while? They've moved so much further behind than they were in the last election.
Yeah, the data points are a hot mess. They got the biggest popular vote share in like 40 years a year ago in the last election, and every day it looks like they're just keeping their head above water. His response to a technical recession was so over the top. It gives a sense of, I don't know. They're not catching the vibe. It's almost like a desperation. He has obstruction as their strategy. He is obstinate. He is pig-headed, and it comes across, and people can tell. They can feel it. I think that they need to spend the summer really connecting with ordinary folks. And I know that sounds cliche, but I feel like the tempo of Parliament that the Conservatives have been sharing is they've been listening to themselves, they've been listening to their friends online. They need to go to those barbecues, they need to talk to the constituents, they need to go to those coffee houses at senior centers and just listen to how people are feeling and what they're thinking. He needs to present something positive, constructive, and forward thinking, and he hasn't done that. To a part because he's, reeling from floor crossers and that sort of stuff. But I would say, like, there's also this underlying sentiment on the Conservative side of the equation about if we look at the BC Conservative leadership race, for example, right? Like, they picked one of the most hardline right-wing candidates when on offer were some that were more centrist. And there has been some schisms that have been exposed about that sound and rhyme like the schism between Doug Ford and Pierre Poilievre, who still, they could be pokeroo because they're never seen in the same place at the same time. I think there's some real problems that they need to sort out, but in my long experience, a lot of this comes down to leadership, and it's up to him to lead, and he needs to provide something more than what he's provided, because it's turning people off, and I think Mark Carney's eating his lunch.
Dan, just on that, but also just, is there a relationship between how good things are going for the Liberals and how bad things are going for the Conservatives? Is one causing the other? Are the Liberals dropping the Conservative numbers, or are the Conservatives pushing up the Liberal numbers? What do you think's been going on?
Yeah. I mean, it's always difficult when your opponent is doing well to get traction. That said, we've seen the Conservatives go down, maybe losing votes to the NDP even, and we can talk about that when we get to the NDP, but it seems like, they've dropped a few points over the past couple months while the Liberals have stayed largely equal. Poilievre has gotten himself out there to a large extent. He's done a lot of media in 2026. He did Rogan. He's done a lot of other podcasts. They have a national TV buy going on right now that they're spending at least $1 million. I'd imagine more than that on. I looked at their 2 ads on YouTube. They both have over 10 million views each. So they're obviously spending money to drive eyeballs to them. And even if they're not, that's 10 million eyeballs. That's a lot of eyes on their ads. So they're putting their message out there, but it's not clicking. It's not clicking in the polls. They had their 3 worst by-elections of the last decade this spring as well too. So obviously people are not, buying what Poilievre is selling right now. I quoted Eminem the last time we did a podcast. Maybe I'll quote Taylor Swift this time to be more topical. But it's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. I think Pierre Poilievre is the problem here for the Conservatives. People have looked at him. They don't seem to love him. And I don't know if that's going to change. I don't know if he can make people love him after they've kind of formed that impression. So, I think back at the last year of Trudeau's time in power, I think tactically Trudeau did a lot of really good things the last year. His budget rollout was really well done. Again, a lot of podcasts that they did some things that I thought were well done. But when people kind of tune you out, nothing really lands. They just made up their minds. And I think voters may have made up their minds about Poilievre in a lot of ways.
I'll say the one demographic thing, if I were giving them advice this summer, it would be to spend all that ad money in that 55 plus demographic. They need to draw those people back under their tent. That is a foundational tent pole, and they've not having it's really problematic.
Yeah, except you have to have a message for that, James. I mean, I don't disagree.
Well, then they should go to this.
But you need and I think that generation, that demographic is still very much in a reassuring. They want a reassuring message. They, and to Dan's point, I mean, I think Mr. Carney is cornering the market right now, and as government, he has the platform and he has the tools to provide that reassurance. I will say that. Opposition leaders certainly, go through their moments where they'll struggle and get tuned out. That they're in opposition. I mean, what they need to do is not, have a temper tantrum and stamp their feet and throw things, at the wall. They need to then just say, okay, I just need to be patient. I need to go back. I need to understand what the environment is. I need to be ready when the moment comes, when Canadians will tune me back in, because they will. I mean, there's an election at some point, and you'll have a shot. Now, you're either going to make it a quick 5-minute look and go, shit, it's the same thing I saw 3 years ago, nothing to see here, or you've got something that you can present that's more in tune with where voters are. So, I think. From what I see, Conservatives are still raising money, and obviously they still have a knack for spending it. So we'll see.
I do wonder if, you're talking about older voters and trying to connect with them more. I do wonder if the referendum in Alberta is an opportunity for Poilievre. This is something that older voters will care about, and I think as an Alberta MP, as somebody who can actually kind of stand up to a lot of separatism sentiment that is driven by Conservatives, Poilievre, I think, is uniquely positioned there. So, a summer where he is speaking passionately about Canada, not too negative, not saying Canada if it's conservative, but not Canada otherwise, but actually full-throated support of Canada. I think that could be a good look for him and could maybe help him with some of those older demographics.
If I was writing them a quote, Eric, I would prescribe 12 in-person focus groups at senior centers all across the country and a 4,000 end poll of people 55 plus. But I don't get to make those recommendations.
Before we move on to the Conservatives, Andrew, you know the party well. If we continue to see the kind of numbers we've seen in some polls where Poilievre's doing as well as Andrew Scheer and Aaron O'Toole did, is there patience within the party to keep him around, or will that patience break?
I think there'll be patience. I don't. I think that it's important that there is some reflection that they do need to make some changes. I think we saw, as Dan pointed out, they tried to be a bit more aggressive in terms of some getting out into some different media, getting out into some different speaking forums. I think that's still needs to be done. I think the referendum is another opportunity where he needs to sort of really roll up his sleeves and get into a good message track on that. And I think, as Dan said, I think there's opportunity. If he does those things, I think caucus will be patient. I don't, certainly don't hear or see any sort of, rumblings at this stage. I mean, he came through with an 80% plus approval from the membership. and he won the original leadership with over 60%. So I think he's got a fair amount of support. So it'll take it would take a lot, I think, to generate the kind of unrest that would unseat like we saw with O'Toole.
So the New Democrats, since we last chatted, they have a new leader, Avi Lewis. We'll start with you, James. What do you think is what impact has he had so far? We've seen in some polls, for example, that the NDP has been in sometimes in double digits in some recent polling, and not in every poll, but we have seen that in some polling. So I got questions about whether it's a real vote, it's a parked vote, that kind of thing. But James, what do you think his impact has been since his arrival on the scene?
Yeah, I think he has an advantage. So I don't think we've spoken since the leadership race. He won on the first ballot with 56% of the vote in Winnipeg, which is a clear victory. He had a slate of table officers that he didn't endorse but are aligned with him that also won. So they have a certain amount of control of the party, which is also a victory for him. Unfortunately, he has no seat in the House, and his caucus could fit, they say, in a minivan, but with 5 MPs, they can fit in a sedan.
Someone just needs to sit on the bump in the middle, yeah.
Exactly. A Cadillac. Let's say a Cadillac. No, but to be the one thing he's got going. So the results from the last election were all-time low. So the nice thing about polling that's coming out now is they have a little marker in it that compares it to the results of the last election. And by that measurement, all the polls are looking like he's got wind on his back. So it's looking good. And I think a lot of it, from what we're seeing out there and some of the data we're pulling, is a reversion to the norm in the double digits, low teens, coming back to a certain degree to New Democrats. The nice thing is they now have, since he came, the Board of Internal Economy has bestowed upon them a budget for staff, which is good for them. But as far as messaging and positioning is concerned, he is unknown by and large by the vast majority of the population. They don't know him. They couldn't pick him out of a lineup. They don't know what he sounds like or what he says. Those who do have a specific activist view of his history, for better or worse. And as we've seen, that's not a wash, but it can be a wash in some polls. So he has a challenge of presenting himself to people. And with the lack of relevance in the House of Commons, that's a bigger uphill battle. I'm watching some of their communications, and they're adapting and evolving as it goes, moving to some traditional stuff. I think they got a real win on algorithmic pricing and AI, in so much that especially for the grocery store stuff, it looks as though Carney had big announcement this week about it. That's been a big driver of people's concerns in the public, and it looks like Avi has sunk his teeth into that. And I think that will only help him. But their real challenge remains to be structural debt, and they don't have a voice at committees either. So they've got a lot of things in front of them, and Avi doesn't have a seat. So I think he needs to spend a bit. They've committed to spending a lot of time out there in the public, and I think they'll do that. I'm given that we're in a state of majority government, I think the pressure is off them a little bit. They can contrast. They can find the space that Mark Carney has left a progressive flank open on labor, on the environment, on AI, on oligarchs. Oligarchs, that's a term they use south of the border, but it's a term that Avi rolls off his tongue. There's a lot of space for him to skate. And I think time will tell whether they can overcome some of those structural challenges and the communications challenges to really land where they're stick the landing. But I think to date they have a low watermark to measure against, and they're doing good against that, I would say.
Dan, what do you think? What has his arrival meant for the NDP?
Probably not much yet, because as James said, he's not well known. He has time to introduce himself. To James's point, I do think the Liberals getting to a majority government is probably a godsend for the NDP, because now they don't have to twist themselves into knots for explaining why they're not voting against the government that they think is terrible. They can just say this government's terrible and not have to worry about an election as a consequence of that. So I think that is good news for them and gives them a little more time to raise money and get ready for the next election campaign. But yeah, the biggest challenge is just getting him better known. I'll give you some exclusive. We're in field right now on a polling that we'll put out for media in a week or two. And this is something we did a couple of years ago. We asked Canadians, can you just name the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada? And people had to actually type the actual name into the screen. And back then, 57% of people could name Pierre Poilievre as the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. This was before his first election campaign. We're doing it again with Poilievre, but also with Avi Lewis. Right now, he's running at about 20% of people who say I can name the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. But I did check those this morning just to see where we were at. And I think there's more Jagmeet Singh answers than Avi Lewis answers within that 20%, and a few Don Davies and a few Wab Canoes, which maybe is wishful thinking more than reality. But I think it's probably under 10% of Canadians, when all is said and done, once we crunch the numbers, that will actually successfully be able to name him as the NDP leader. So he's got to get himself better known. He's got to get himself out there. He's got to introduce himself. I actually think, a lot of Liberals I know are like, oh, Avi Lewis is going to be the death knell of the NDP. He's too radical. He's too far left wing. Look, I don't think Avi Lewis can win a general election, but I think he can certainly speak to 20%, 15%, whatever it is, of Canadians who are upset with the system. And I think he's certainly got the potential to rekindle at least a very strong protest vote, which is above the 7 or 10% that the NDP are routinely polling at. So I would not underestimate him at all. I think he's got the potential to coalesce some of that frustration that is out there and get the NDP back to at least respectability in the near term, if he can get himself known and cut through to the public.
I'll be curious to see the typos and the spelling for Avi Lewis. Pierre Poilievre I still remember
a lot of Peter Poilievres and things like that.
Yeah, no, it was great. Andrew, your thoughts on Avi Lewis, and also he has this what he calls more of a populist left approach. Like, I wonder if the Conservatives, of any reason, like from the Conservative perspective, should they be happy or concerned that Avi Lewis became leader?
I think you'd get a little bit of maybe not so much from the leader's office or central campaign. I think they would look at at Avi Lewis, the fact that he won a strong majority, that fact that it looks like he's got complete control of the party, that one would hope that over time it starts to reclaim some of that vote. I mean, I'm not quite as bullish as James in terms of that they're solidly in double digits yet. I think they could still have some work to do, but look, they need to be in the high double digits. 18, 19, 20% for Conservatives to feel a bit more comfortable about winning some seats in the GTA and some other parts of the country. That is really very difficult if the NDP are going to pull down under 10%. So I think in that perspective, I think Conservatives would look at this as, hey, wish you well. Hopefully, I'm sure they were probably voting on the Board of Eternal Economy to give them money, in terms of helping them out. I think there probably some Conservatives around the Hamilton and maybe on Vancouver Island that might be looking a little bit at this, going, well, okay, where does the populist the left populist come back? Maybe. I mean, the Conservatives still have a very strong message on affordability and on some of those things. So they'll say, yeah, we might lose some of that traditional steel worker union, private sector union to Avi, but maybe not. We'll fight hard on that front. But the big picture, you'd want him back. I think that a little bit of a challenge, for the federal NDP is that I think some of the openings are going to be on energy and on sort of the energy versus environment front, and that's especially on the Alberta MOU and some of those things, and that's going to now you're going to run into Naheed Nenshi in Alberta, who is very much trying to keep a bit of a distance with respect to the federal NDP on that front as they look into next year an election. I mean, which could be that's always a bit of an issue for the provincial NDP in Alberta. Is we don't hate the oil patch like Avi Lewis does or has done in the past. I mean, maybe he takes the edge off that. We'll see what he says. So some challenges ahead, but hopefully, I mean, he can generate. I think he's got a good, he's got a good ear, he got good nose for media, for issues. He's very, I think he's articulate. So hopefully, that pays off in terms of getting them back on the radar. And I agree wholeheartedly on the fact that with a majority, he doesn't have to keep looking over his shoulder. He can just be opposition.
I'll just add, Eric, and I provided this commentary to, some folks, is like the things that Avi had to win are he raised a lot of money. I mean, a lot is in quotes, certainly compared to the flotilla of cash conservatives drag in every month. But for a party that had no status, he's an excellent communicator. Anybody who's heard him speak knows he does not have those first-year freshman stumbles like many new leaders. He is a sharp political communicator. And last of all, he looks like he wants to do this job. He presents like he's, aside from content aside, because most people actually don't absorb the content, his joy he brings, and that he wants to do this, he has a yearning to do it, comes across very well. And those three things are really, really dangerous with political leaders: fundraising, good communications, and the real strong desire to go for it. So I think underestimating him, folks do that at their own, detriment. Those are sharp.
All right. I think we have time for a quick go around on Alberta. So we got the referendums, 10 of them, 10 questions, with the main one being on remaining in Canada versus starting the process to not remain in Canada. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the public opinion environment in Alberta as we look towards this referendum. James, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what is the recent one that said 72% of Albertans support staying in Canada? Like, it is incongruent with the message that Premier Smith thinks she is weaving the needle on about, keeping these two sides together very delicately. It is, to my mind, it's political theater of her managing her base. And the more information we get from this, the more data points that come out of it points to she's not doing this as a result of public sentiment, of growing public sentiment. And that's not to underscore the concerns and legitimate grievances people have. They're real. People are, experts on their own life. And if they have concerns, they're very real. But her job as the premier is to direct the conversation for the good of the province, and to a certain degree, because it's a confederation, to the good of the country. And she's clearly not doing that. And it's a very questionable path she's taking. We don't have recent data in the field that I can share, but something late in 2025 certainly had this pretty far off of the top priorities for Albertans.
Andrew, I know that Léger's been polling a lot in Alberta. What do you think?
Yeah, we don't really disagree very much on this podcast, but I'll disagree with James a bit on this, that, Daniel Smith could have just stomped this thing out and squashed it like a cigarette butt and been done with it. I mean, the reality is there hasn't been a progressive conservative right of center premier since Ralph Klein that managed to stick around and lead that party into a second election after winning a majority. There's a really clear, well-trodden path to jettison the leader of the party, in whether it was the Progressive Conservatives, the UCP. And I don't discount that as an issue that had to be acknowledged by Smith. I mean, she succeeded Jason Kenney, who was offed by the party. Certainly, that had to have been a preoccupation. I'm not sure whether or not, we may say we don't like Daniel Smith and the fact that she's late to the party in terms of being a Federalist or whatever, but you get a successor to Daniel Smith in there as a new premier. I'm not sure that's any better. So I think yes, public opinion, our polling shows 70, I think our last poll was 70% plus that are, that want to remain in the country. But there's certainly even those that want to remain still are very adamant in terms of some changes that they want to see in terms of the relationship Alberta has in Confederation. It's not going to be a fun campaign. I think the separatist forces are starting. You can see it already. Are starting to get a bit more, much more aggressive, and they're going to start to feel the weight of more people piling on. So we'll have to see where things go. And I don't discount that there's not going to be a direct challenge to Smith's leadership at some point in time. Again, it can be moved. Whether or not it's successful, I think part of that is her response and some of her moves are calculated that she can ensure it won't be successful.
Yeah, public and opinion environment within the UCP very different than
very different than the general public.
Yeah, Dan, I know you lived a part of your life in Alberta. What's your take on where things stand?
Yeah, look, I think Andrew's right. Smith is clearly doing this to save her own job, but that's not a good look for voters usually when they see that. So I think it's going to be a tough couple of months for her. And most of the polling that's been out in the last week or two would suggest that her approval on this issue is a lot lower than her overall approval. So I think it's going to be a rocky few months for her. I don't know how this referendum is going to go. Like, I think, Pollara, last time we did a poll on this was in March. We had 27% of Albertans who would vote to separate. But we also had another chunk of people who said, I might vote to send a message, even if I don't want to separate. And that gets the number up to 42% when you kind of add those together. And this is now a referendum that is effectively like voting to send a message because it's not binding and there'll be another referendum afterwards. So there's potential for that number to get higher. The most fun stat, though, I've seen in the past year of anything I've done is that 57% of people voting to separate in Alberta also say they're proud to be Canadian. So if those proud Canadian Alberta separatists vote to stay in Canada, then you're down to like 12-15% support. So this could go in a lot of different directions, and I think the campaign will matter. Coming out of it, I think it's going to have a lot of obviously implications because this sets up the next election in Alberta. For a long time, the UCP and before then the PCs have certainly benefited from the dynamics in Alberta of this being a province that kind of votes left-right, and the party in the right is just more aligned with the broader public. But if we did see a bit of a recalibration with Alberta shifting more to like a Quebec dynamic where people are voting on federalist sovereigntists as opposed to left-right, that's not as good for the UCP long-term. So I think what comes out of this election will be interesting. Is this just kind of a one-off and we go back to business as usual, or does this fundamentally lead to some kind of change in terms of how people look at the parties? I think that's something to keep an eye on, and we'll see obviously how that leads into the next Alberta provincial election.
Yeah, we'll hopefully chat again before that campaign begins, but we'll end it there. And I want to thank all three of you for joining me again. So have a great summer, and we'll chat again in the fall when we'll find out how everything is going to unfold over the next few months. So thanks a lot, guys.
Perfect.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks all.